Good morning or good afternoon, everybody. My name is Lieutenant Commander Anna Kokot. I am the XO here at HMCS Tecumseh, though currently on leave. I'll be back soon, though. I'm also a board member with Royal United Alberta Services Institute. So, on behalf of both Tecumseh and the Institute, I would like to welcome everyone here today. So, thank you very much for coming. So, as you may already be aware, 2023 marks the 100th anniversary of the Naval Reserve, as well as HMCS Tecumseh. So, for this reason, we have asked Commodore Pat Montgomery, Commander Naval Reserve, to give us a presentation today, which he has very kindly agreed to do. Commodore Montgomery enrolled as a Naval Warfare Officer at HMCS Malahat in Victoria in 1986 as a part-time reservist. So he moved to Edmonton to complete his PhD in applied mathematics, after which he joined the faculty at the University of British Columbia in Prince George. He spent several years doing full-time service, including command of 2 Kingston-class vessels, and then in 2015 transitioned back to Class A or part-time work. While joining the faculty at Commodore College in Victoria in the Department of Mathematics and Statistics. So he served as the Naval Reserve Western Region Captain from 2015 to 2018, followed by a posting as a Special Assistant to the Director General, Naval Strategic Readiness. Commodore Montgomery was promoted to his current rank and appointed Commander Naval Reserve in July of 2021. So please join me in welcoming Commodore Montgomery for Lunch and Learn.
Thank you very much, Lieutenant Commander Kokot. Stand in the right spot so the cameras get this. Good afternoon and welcome. It's a pleasure to be here on the traditional territories, Treaty 4. Hi, Jeff. Petty Officer Drew, can you hear me back there?
Good to go, sir.
Awesome. Good. Okay. So I'm trying to balance both the microphone on the computer and the positioning, so I hope this all works. Oh, it got rid of the echo. Well, brilliant. So absolutely, it's a pleasure to be here today, and I thank you for the invitation to come and talk. I know talking to General Stanton earlier, he said, we've got the Director General Army Reserves in town. We could always get him a seat speaking. And so I thought it was great for the Navy to lead on this one, but thank you very much for the opportunity. So what I'd like to do is just spend a few minutes and telling you a little bit about the story about the Naval Reserve, understanding that there's a background of security and defense that you're thinking about, and trying to get that big picture out of the details. So I thought I'd just present some ideas, some comments, some vignettes, and blend that into a story that we might be able to take some defense and security issues away from, hopefully answering, maybe causing more questions or creating more questions than answering. But that's my intent today. So I hope that's light enough and works well with the lunch that's been provided. And welcome to those of you online. Thank you very much. I apologize if I'm not looking at the camera all the time, but being here for in person and getting a free lunch, that's the perk that they get. So what do I want to talk about? The other piece is I might stray a little bit into that political arena today, so I'd like to just hold you as a privileged platform. I'm not speaking on behalf of the National Defense or the Chief of Defense Staff, so if I do say anything that you think, oh, that's a political minefield, I want to stay away from that. That's not my intent. My intent is an academic one in terms of causing thought and causing ideas. So sometimes we need to stray into the gray to get ourselves into that space and talk about it. So just a forewarning if you see anything like that. The standard information disclaimer that I own the information. And to start with, so past, present, and future was the title of the talk, but really, I want to think about the big picture of that, which is what is the potential, what is the impact, how does it work to have a primarily part-time component of the Canadian Forces, of the Navy, and how has that evolved, and why are we here today, and where are we going? So the impact of a part-time component of the Navy. So the sort of strategic questions that I was thinking about when I was pulling this through was, why, what are we doing, and how do we do it? So um, what value does it give us to have a part-time component? Is that the best thing to do? And how do we optimize that? And then where are we going? How do we evolve? How do we remain effective? How do we stay fresh? Right? Big questions. I can't answer those today, and I won't answer those today, but I want us to keep working on those because otherwise we'll never get better. So to tell a little bit of a story, basing ourselves on that centennial. So I'm going to go back 100 years. Was anybody here? Where's John? You weren't here. Nobody's over. Commodore Earthleaf, I don't think is here today, so we can't joke about that. So if you remember back World War One, our brand new Navy, which was only started in 1910, was in the middle of what seemingly are normal budget cuts and personnel reductions, and the time during World War One saw about 8,000. I'm going to get this right. Royal Navy Canadian Voluntary Reserve or Volunteer Reserve, RNCVR. That was a temporary thing, stood up during wartime. We had about 8,000 all male volunteers at the time, pulled into that volunteer service, and then it was quickly shut down after the war. So that experience set a backdrop and said, oh, okay, as we're reducing the numbers of people and due to budget cuts, how do we maintain the skills? How do we maintain that ability to mobilize if we need to do so again? Because starting from scratch was a painful experience. So very sensible. Okay, so this gets back to that question number one, the why. So that in the early 1920s, a couple of nice quotes. The Naval Secretary said, if a Dominion is to spend money on a Navy, maybe it's easier if I read that. No, it's people must be convinced that a Navy is necessary. The most effective method to educate the people is to bring the Navy to their doors into the life of their family and friends. So a different approach, not one that says we're just going to take everybody who's employed and keep them on a reserve list, but we're going to go forward into the community and into Canada to do a couple of things. One, get a personnel base, and the other one must be convinced that a Navy is necessary. That's a political imperative. So interesting thought process from the time. So from that, a reserve force distributed across Canada, important, would bring the Navy home to a great number of inland people. So that was a generating point. Okay, so the leader at the time who took that wartime experience and translated it into the start of a Naval Reserve is pictured on the right here. Then Commodore Walter Hose, who was the director of the Naval Service, I believe might have been director rather than chief. The name's changed. So 1923, 100 years ago, they agreed to create a Naval Reserve. So we had, as I set the scene, the lessons of wartime mobilization, needing skill sets, and wanting to be out in the country. So that was the impetus, and that got us going. So a couple of dates that we're going to use, 15th of January, so slightly more than 100 years ago, a order from the Privy Council to establish the Royal Canadian Navy Reserve. So they flipped the letters from the RNCR to the RCNR, so that was interesting. And the Royal Canadian Naval Royal Canadian Navy Volunteer Reserve. So we kind of had two types of reserve that were overlaid. I'm not going to move into it much, but the biggest piece was the RCNVR of 1,000 strength across the country. And across the country, what did I say? Yep, that worked. So they rapidly created half companies across the country. And I think by the end of the year, we had 12 cities that are all established across the country, Calgary being one of them. And that means it's their centennial as well. So Montreal, Hamilton, Winnipeg, Ottawa, Edmonton, Calgary, Toronto, Quebec, Saskatoon, St. John, Regina, and Charlottetown. And then later, Vancouver and Prince Rupert. So what do we see about that? Well, we see diverse distribution across the country. so the geographic footprint. And we also see population centers where people might have skills in the industry. So you're leveraging the skills in the industry. Prince Rupert, not necessarily an industrial town, but a maritime town, fishing. So you're getting the maritime skills thoughtfully, right? So there was probably some thought around where. In any case, so 100 years ago, 1,000 positions created the RCNVR across the country, and that's our foundation. So that starting point is to where we are today. So let's see. Let me advance into World War II. A huge mobilization, and we know we saw this across the country. But within the Navy, we expanded from that base of 1,000 almost to 100,000. That's monstrous, and you can see the impact of bringing in Canadians through the Naval Reserve, through the RCNVR, which acted as an initial training piece, initial recruiting across the country. So an amazing feat to get people through the doors and out to sea. What did we do? Well, most of the RCNVR was fighting the Battle of the Atlantic, as you well know, likely. The corvettes, the escort duty, the convoys from Halifax and Sydney over to the North Atlantic, to Norway, to the Mediterranean, and to Britain were the lifeline of the Battle of the Atlantic. And mostly the sailors in those ships were coming from the RCNVR. There's a commemoration project. I need to put that plug in. Captain retired Kim Kubek is running. I'm not sure, Tecumseh, if you're contributing to this one. I didn't take a look, but they're starting to commemorate and capture the stories of many of those sailors from World War II and find out the resting places of those. It's an amazing project that you'll see more of this year. Let me see. I wanted to say that a couple of outcomes of that massive expansion. So what did we learn? Well, establish that utility of having a diverse network across the country so they could quickly turn on the taps. So that worked. What we didn't expect, I would say, nobody at the time maybe, was we established the start of an operational legacy that saw us focus on convoy duty and anti-submarine warfare, primarily in the Atlantic regions, based on that wartime experience, because everybody knew that job well. So it was natural to carry that sense of this is what I know how to do forward. I mean, we always say that we design our forces to fight the last war, right? So that made sense. But interestingly, that knowledge, that technical operational knowledge, seemed to reside a little bit more within the Naval Reserve than the regular force Navy, which was focused on getting aircraft carriers out the door, and Bonaventure and Nabob, and different part of warfighting. So there's a legacy that probably was not intended, but it was the first, at least in my mind, and again, this is me, this is not a historian, this might have been the first idea that said, there's a center of excellence, there's a center of expertise that has been created. Where do we keep that? Where do we put it? And how do we make it the most useful for the future? And should we think about that? How do we do that? Interesting. So great questions, but I'm not sure if it's a working model, but a good example. Okay, let me move a little bit forward to more fun stuff. So we rapidly going through the last few decades, growth in Naval Reserve divisions, a little bit of contraction at some point. So we had different cities opening up, and we're now at 24. Expansion in Quebec in the late 1980s, a program many of you may have heard called Naval Presence in Quebec. But à cause de ça, je suis presque bilingue. Il y a très difficile pour l'anglophone de parler français, naturellement. Jeff, you're learning this now. It's It's hard to program an old brain, absolutely, but it's not an excuse. Until Canadians come out of high school bilingual, we need to put effort into that. So this is an example to me of the Navy getting diversity through the Naval Reserve because we're bringing in people from across the country, particularly in Quebec. And I'll come back to this, but that the last few decades have seen different terminology. I'm probably missing one. Total force concept integration, one CAF, one Navy. Anything I'm missing on that? I mean, what does that mean though? That means that we had disconnected ourselves in some way and need to reconnect so that we can do a better job together. When I say we, I mean everybody in uniform. Today, so this is maybe a few more color pictures. 24 divisions, for those of you who don't know, pretty much in every major center across the country. In Alberta, we've got one, of course, here at Tecumseh and non-such at Edmonton. One headquarters in Quebec City. If you've never been there, it's an astoundingly beautiful place. It's just a jewel, I would say, of the forces footprint across the country. It's right on the water, and I think the going rate for a room, if you could book, $70 a night. If anybody remembers, outstanding deal. So I'm happy to, answer those questions about Quebec City. Beautiful. We're right now at about 4,200 people, plus ou moins, and we're hoping to eventually get up to our establishment on paper of 5,464. I find it interesting, just a curiosity. As a mathematician, anytime somebody gives you a specific number, there must have been a formula behind it. But I've never found the formula for who came up with 5,464. Why wasn't it 5,000? Why wasn't it 5,500? Which would be a reasonable thing. Conversely, anytime a budget manager says it'll be $7 million, you know it's not accurate because they're giving you a round number. So there's no formula. Anyway, Chief Campbell, I know you challenged me on that, but that's fun. Of that 4,200 personnel, now this is where we get into what the reserves are doing and how we're doing it. Roughly a quarter, so 1,100 give or take, are working full time. So every day they're putting on their uniform and they're doing something within the Canadian Forces, within the Navy, which is different. That's not a past precedent. That's not something that we did in 1940. 1940 is a bad year. 1950, let's say, post-war, where people demobilized and went home. So interestingly, we have a portion of our establishment that is working all the time. And some may say, well, that means your regular force, right? Well, I don't know. It's debatable. What is the difference now between regular and reserve? If somebody's working full time, what does that mean? And for how long are they working? We have about 300 people at sea, give or take, on any one moment, from small ships to large ships, all over the place. So augmenting the fleet to about, 10%-ish of the overall number of personnel at sea at any one time. A few of those groups right now, about 50-ish on named operations abroad, so not a large impact, but significant. The operation vector, right, for the COVID injections, right? I think we had up to at one point 1,200 reservists, 1,200 naval reservists helping out with that effort. So that's a huge number compared to our 4,200. It was amazing, and to see all those people put down their civilian jobs, volunteer, and go help the communities, really astounding. And the rest, so that number doesn't add up, I know, but these are round, are basically doing everything else part-time. So primarily a part-time base across the country, and a few of us are out at sea at any one time, a few of us are deployed, and a few of us are full-time. So I should pause. Any questions? Yeah.
Just wondering, the Chief of Defense Staff has a new program or reconstitution of the CAF. And I'm wondering how that impacts the reserves, because the reserves are obviously below their numbers too. So there must be an impact on the reserves.
Yeah. I think I'll speak to that directly in a later slide. So if I can come back to reconstitution, that's perfect, because then it'll make more sense. Geographic dispersion. So a nice map of where we are. 24 Naval Reserve divisions, as I said. I do want to note most of it is Ontario and Quebec. That's where most of the population of Canada is. So that makes sense. The point I wanted to pull out from this slide, across the country, we're contributing to full-time service through, or part-time, I'm going to get this wrong, full-time effect through part-time service, right? Okay. Thank you.
I'll agree with you
there. Yeah. So we've started to be able to name some tactical capabilities that reside predominantly within the Naval Reserve. And this is a little bit of a shell game in some case, but port inspection. So we have, for example, our Naval Reserve divers, and the Navy has said, okay, good, here's a job called port inspection. It's kind of small enough that you guys can do it part-time. So here you go, you've got it. And great, wonderful. So that gives the Navy a capability based on the part-time capability that exists. So Naval Reserve Intelligence is a big one, a naval security team, port inspection divers. Culture change is another piece that I'm playing very loose with the operational capabilities. Attractions, recruiting, and outreach are, of course, going back to 1923, a main reason for establishing a reserve across the country. Digitization or digitalization, I don't know the difference between those words. And domestic operations and mobilization, I talked about Operation Vector and how much of a piece that was. So they're more than niche capabilities, I would say. So if you're following, we've done a lot. We've got sailors at sea doing the job of being at sea. We've got sailors ashore full-time supporting the organization, be it from directing the Naval Reserve Band to making sure that people are getting paid, to working on project management in Ottawa. I mean, this is a range of activities that support not only the Canadian forces, but the establishment and the capabilities that we've been given. So, reconstitution, I promised I'd get back to that. Okay. The recruiting nature of a part-time service is an interesting space to work in. Because when a young sailor comes to any reserve division, they're usually welcomed very easily because there's no commitment. You can walk in and say, hey, I'd like to try that. And they say, great, come on in and try this. And there's no commitment. And that gives us a leverage to help people find out if this life in uniform works for them. And if they like it, then great. Now we have a different question. Do you want to do this full time? Do you want to do this for your entire career? And so can we be a proper recruiting base for the regular force? There's a difference of opinion here. Some in the regular force say, well, we want you to come in right away and say, I want to do this trade. This is what I want to do for the rest of my life. And I want to sign up today. Well, that's great. Might be a little simplistic, in my opinion. I think it's a relationship. Those of you who have been have long-term relationships and your partners have been with you for a long time, realize it grows, it changes over time. And what you are excited about now in your lives may not have been what brought you together in the first place, but you've had a journey together. So I would like to think that the recruiting aspect of the Naval Reserve is an augmentation to those who know what they're doing and know what they want to do and have made up their mind. Wonderful, off they go. To those who say, I'd like to try it out a little bit. So, with that in mind, our reconstitution really started about 5 years ago. The Naval Reserve numbers, that 5,464 establishment, which was up here, we were hovering in the low 3,000s for about half a decade. And we went back to the recruiting and said, how do we make this better? How do we improve process? And that had effect. So we've been increasing, as you can see, the bar graphs. It's all happy. We've been increasing our establishment from really the low 3,000s now to the low 4,000s with the aim to get up there. Reconstitution has slowed that effort. Not substantially, it hasn't stopped it, but what it's done, it's started to divert some of the recruits directly into the regular force. So even though our recruiting numbers have been good and stable, the number of recruits who have said, hey, I'd like to join, and quickly said, I really like it, I want to continue off in a full-time career, has increased. So that's good news for the country because we're getting another dedicated Canadian to dedicate their life to service for the country. So that's really what we're seeing. So does that address the reconstitution question?
Yeah, I think so. Thank you.
So that's our part in reconstitution. We're working the numbers. We're increasing the interaction machine to see if we can get that relationship cemented quicker for those who realize that they would like to be regular force members. So I thought I'd pause a bit before getting into the future, and just this is a little bit small slide, so I don't want you to worry and strain your eyes. There's a defense policy in 2017, strong, secure, engaged. The government's working on a defense policy update. I haven't seen what it is, but I don't think it'll stray too much. But if you read strong, secure, and engaged, there are a number of points in there which directly relate to reserve service. And so some of those translate into kind of what we've been talking about, enabling reserve force units to provide full-time capability through part-time service. So that's the language I was stumbling over. Ensure reservists are a well-integrated component of that total force. Again, coming back to the integration theme. Appropriately train, prepare, and equip reservists in sufficient numbers to be ready to contribute to operations at home and abroad. Okay, check, we're doing that. We've got sailors at sea, we've got sailors abroad. Great. What do you mean appropriately train, prepare, and equip? So we need to have a discussion about what we can do better. Modernize the service model of the reserve force. That gets into the pay and benefits and how do we actually run it, the human resources piece. And also increase the size of the primary reserve force to 30,000. So that getting to 54, 64 in our case. To help strong, secure, and engaged get there, the Chief of Reserves, I think, has a document called New Vision for the Reserve Force, or New Vision for the Reserve Force Strategy, which is just about something that we'll be able to release. We're going to a meeting in a month or so to actually discuss that. So it's just about there. But that will hopefully provide some guidance for the forces to get to some of those goals of strong, secure, and engaged. I bring this forward for a couple of reasons. One, to let you know that if you're in the back and you're thinking, what are we doing for the future? Okay, people are thinking about it. People are working on it. Do you see it every day? No, but it's in the works, right? But also, interestingly, the themes in strong, secure, and engaged are kind of what we were doing, right? We're picking up where we left off. And I don't know if I'm using the phrase correctly, but the best way to see where you're going is to look where you've been, right? And I don't see it surprising. I mean, we knew that we needed to reconstitute and increase numbers. So great, let's turn on one of those taps, which is increase the primary reserve. Because traditionally, that's been a sense of mobilization. It all makes sense. The interesting struggle has been the language about full-time capability through part-time service and what that means and what exactly we want to do with that. But that's all semantics. So that's where I said I'd stray into the political arena. So I don't want to get anything. So I'm thankful to Public Affairs for this picture because it was the only one that wasn't a Navy picture. It might be, I don't know if it's out of Valcartier or not. So there you go. Happy. So getting there, some of the challenges that are on the table that you can think of them right away. Obviously, there's a financial one. We can only do so much given the funds and given the training aids, the ships at sea, the technology limits us. Not to say that we don't have what we need, but to say that that's a factor. If I wasn't given the okay to get on a plane and come here, so that's a financial decision, we wouldn't be having this discussion. So it's obviously a limiter. Where I would say the tactical piece is making sure that we're sharing that information, learning, and we've got a learning-centered organization, as the chief likes to say. The ability to put the equipment and the practical theoretical training into effect. Obviously, it's a challenge, but it's our challenge, and we own it, and that's the space that we're in. The more fun challenges are larger. Interesting. I brought this up because it occurred to me. A social challenge is not really a challenge, but it's part of our lives. Many of you being retired members of the forces know that there's a connection. That's a social connection once you retire, but you're impacting where we're going. You're interested, you're engaged. So that's part of our, I'd say, opportunity, not so much challenge, but how do we manage that? How do we get that useful interconnection with our communities and make sure we're doing this right? And then institutional, within ourselves, anybody who's in uniform, what problems do we have within our organization that we can make better? And any of us who've been in uniform for more than a day probably have a laundry list of those problems that we can make things, this is what you're doing today that we need to make better. We could all say that. Probably need to have some more liquid courage to get there. But anyhow. Okay. How are we for time? Who's keeping the clock? Anna, are we okay?
Yeah.
So generous. So a couple of good news slides then. Coming back to our centenary. So I hope I've outlined a little bit of a story that says this is where we've been and this is where we're going. Well, I haven't said so much about where we're going yet, but why are we here? Well, now you hopefully have a little bit of an understanding. And I've probably touched on some of the challenges. So what are we doing to celebrate our centennial? It's all aligned with our outreach. In order to be true to ourselves and to our foundation, it's about connecting with Canadians. So we designed activities along those lines. National events, grassroots events. We're not interfering with training. So commemorating our history, remembering our past, and showcasing the modern capable force that we are. And it's that simple. So meeting with people, telling them what's going on. And how are we doing that? We've got a nice little logo. Sailor First Class Dima Yuga in Victoria, who was a member of Discovery at the time and is now a file manager, I think, at the recruiting station, designed a patch. We had a contest, and he took these silhouettes, drew himself into the picture, and there's another member of Discovery on the other side, so they can see themselves in the picture, which is wonderful, and took a couple historical images. So the centenary patch, which is there, the Canucks has picked up some of the logo, and we've got lots of stuff that we can sell, but mostly it's about getting the image out there and branding. There is, I believe, a centennial lapel pin that can be worn on the DE uniforms. It's not mandatory, but Andy, have you gotten any of this stuff yet?
Just the badges.
Just the badges. Okay, good. At least you've got those. And I saw the flag out on the mast. So at least you got that. That's good. That's why I'm here to sort of check up on it. Make sure that what HQ tells me is going on is happening.
You need a flag for the museum.
So we need a flag for the museum. Check. Is somebody taking notes for that one? Flags? Perfect. Okay. Some of the events, as I said, hopefully we've got a national recognition coming up in a few weeks on the centenary 31st of January, provincial legislatures, recommissioning of NRDs, Freedom of the City parades, looking at the late September 23rd rings a bell. There's a National Naval Reserve monument that will be rededicated. Navy bike ride in the summertime with, again, the logo, and dragon boat races for a little bit of sporting fun. So that's the gamut. Tulip Festival in Ottawa. So really impressed with the team with how they were able to reach out and put together grassroots ideas. But our future, as I said, just a couple of points to go ahead. Those 1923 imperatives are still there. I would say maybe the mobilization less so. I mean, one sees in Ukraine that it's what you have now that helps turn the tide in the battle. The time it takes to mobilize a large force is a time scale that we often don't have. So having that luxury is maybe a little bit less than it was 100 years ago, but we still need to be out there. We still need to be in the communities talking to Canadians. So what that we've gotten out of that? I mean, those two priorities that Walter Hose started with 100 years ago, I think I see more. I really do. That small set of roles that can retain in the Naval Reserve gives the forces tactical capabilities that we didn't think about before. We're bringing in demographic and culture change just by who we are. Being in the communities and closer to Canadians means that we represent Canadian culture more closely than just picking a coast to go to. Kind of a Navy problem with just on each coast. Diversity of thought, diversity of backgrounds, all of those things coming in. Where would I see us going? I think continuing on the way we've been. So further integration, further blending what it means to be part-time and full-time. I mean, my civilian job at Camosun College, I see that as a model. If you work part-time, you're still a member. Nobody says, oh, but you're full-time faculty, you're part-time faculty, or you're full-time staff, you're part-time staff. I mean, the part-time, full-time isn't part of the issue. That just tells you how much you get paid, but you're a member. And that would be amazing if we could get to that paradigm, because it would really give us flexibility. Moving on our strong security engagement, and if you know that Chief Campbell's here, I didn't introduce you, but that fleet replacement program for the Type 26 destroyers, the joint support ships, what else is on the horizon? The submarine replacement program, possibly replacements for the MCDBs when we get to it, all need people. I mean, we're not going to send ships to sea without the ability to crew them adequately. And I see us continuing to be part of that picture. That's it for me. I very much thank you for letting me speak to you and hopefully share some of my passion and ideas for the future, maybe. I take a very academic viewpoint to some of these things. I like curiosity more than I do hard facts, because you can always pull up counter examples that make things more interesting. So I wanted to open the floor if we have time.
Yes, absolutely. Thank you, sir.
We do.
For a little bit of question.
Yes. Well, we.
Ken Griffiths,
Ken,
President
thank you.
of RAUSI. I was just wondering how you are selling the Naval Reserve centenary so that it's not contradicting the CDS's direction to avoid, can't remember his phrase, in a non-essential activities.
Yeah. Actually, when we sat down and looked at that, the answers we came to quickly were not actually out of line at all with the Chief of Defense's priorities. I mean, the Chief said, okay, no non-essential activities. Okay, but wait a minute, isn't recruiting and outreach essential? Yes. So what we're doing is recruiting and outreach, right? So it's essential. Next question, right? It was very clear after a little bit of thought the activities that we're doing are fully in line with where the chief is going.
Thank you.
Yeah.
The Army can follow suit.
I think you do. Yes.
Also,
I understand from your graph that the reserves are growing steadily. Naval Reserve is growing steadily, and I'm wondering how that compares to the Red Force. Is it easier to recruit for the reserves than for the Red Force?
Well, two parts. The ease in recruiting, I think, yes, because as I said, there's no commitment to join, so it's a low stakes argument. You can bring somebody in and they can sort of dip their toe in the pool and see if they like it or not. So by being all over the country and having that value proposition, I think it's easier to get people to join at any point throughout the year. Sorry, you said two parts, right? The numbers?
Yeah, I'm wondering how that compares to the Red Force. Are they also growing steadily?
I'm going to be careful. I think they're starting to grow again, but I don't see those numbers every day. And it depends on which trade you're looking at. So if you're looking at, one specific set or skill set or trade, those might be growing. Other ones might still be shrinking. Large scale, I think, if I remember right, the Navy grew by like 52 people last year or something very small. Please don't quote me because I don't know if that's correct, but it can vary from month to month. And certainly we're not able to look at strong projections yet, I don't believe. So I can't fully answer that question because I don't have the data on hand. But within the Naval Reserve, our recruiting numbers this year have plateaued a little bit, not for getting people in the door, but for want of moving people into full-time service. And so that sort of subtracts our bottom line. Yeah, there's still work to be done.
I imagine morale is pretty healthy in the reserves, given that there's a balance of maybe more of a balance in life.
Morale in the Naval Reserve. I'd love to think it's the best place to be. That's why I'm here. If I wasn't happy working with the people who are around me, I wouldn't have stayed. So it's kept me in service for a long time. I think maybe Chief Campbell, that's a fleet chief question for sure, but the morale within the Naval Reserve would mirror the forces as well as the individual unit that's there. So Andy Paskey would probably say Tecumseh is the happiest unit in the Naval Reserve, but he'd be struggling with 24 other commanding officers who think they have the happiest unit in the Naval Reserve. Are there people who are disgruntled? There have to be. It would be naive to say everybody's happy because somebody's got to be upset at something. It's human nature. And we have, I would hope, all sorts of mechanisms along the way to catch those, to help people when they start getting disenfranchised. We've got sentinels, we have padres who are kind of on that social worker spectrum. We have chiefs and petty officers who are watching what's going on. We have the ICAT teams. We have, what else am I missing? I don't know, anonymous drop boxes. I mean, all sorts of ways to make sure that we're keeping a pulse on our morale. So from what I've seen, I see dedicated sailors, I see happy sailors. Those who aren't happy aren't here. I can oversell. Bevan, yeah.
What do you see as some of the impediments to the growth of the effectiveness?
I can restate. So quite simply, what are the impediments to growth or to reconstitution? It's really the people, in my perspective. The ability of one person to unlock a couple of files can't be overstated. When we have outstanding recruiters, we see those numbers skyrocket. When we have recruiters who are busy or maybe need a medical leave, then those numbers stagnate naturally. So when we have people doing what they need to do to get people in the door and train them, that works. So getting those people is the biggest biggest piece. It's just off the top of my head, but it's kind of an obvious answer, but it's true.
When you talk about reconstitution, you're talking mostly recruiting, but it's also, I think, accommodating those people that are already in the service.
Yes.
Who may be being pushed out the door for some reason, medical or administrative or whatever it is. So is there some formula in that reconstitution which is looking at accommodating people and maybe overturning some of the decisions that have been made to release these people? Or did you know that?
That's an interesting question. So it's not all about recruiting. It's about changing the structure that we have in place to accommodate people who are already there. I wish Lieutenant General Beaujean was here, because Chief of Military Affairs could probably field that question much better than I can. Within the Naval Reserve, which is where I'll speak to, what we're doing is asking everybody to pay attention to those release factors, first of all. So if a commanding officer sees a certain trend, then we can identify that early and see what we can do to fix it. Now, that's not encompassing, but there are surveys. There are questions that go out. The ways to communicate dissatisfaction are numerous. So we're paying attention from that perspective. But Chief of Military Affairs owns that space for us, so I can't tell you what we're doing. But they're working as much as they can. My last discussion with a peer who's working there said they've got a great big list of things to do, and they just need time and energy to get to do them.
They need to bring people back to work.
Well, if you're in Ottawa, right? Back in the office, you've probably seen that in the news. It's a thing. As much as we're benefiting from the capabilities on Zoom, I personally found it difficult to be at home working on Zoom. It affected my mental health. I found that being back at work when I'm seeing and talking to other people was far more healthy for me. I guess you get to a point where you're old enough, you're set in your ways in some sense. But it's an add-on. I'm amazed at what we can do to catch people who aren't in the room today. It's giving us capability that we didn't think about 10 years ago. Yeah. Yes, General Stanton, Director General, Army Reserves.
First of all, Pat, thanks for coming to Calgary.
Yeah,
I can't
pleasure.
ask you a question in my hometown if you're here, but thanks for helping spread the word on the reserves in general. I know you and we're meeting next week, and then we're meeting with Chief Reserves next month on a bunch of things out there. And in your tenure, and I've got my list of things too. Kind of what's the one initiative or something you want to get about and solve? That's in my sense. But it's common. Like we work in the final shot playing strategic level of things out there, and affecting things and policies and things like that is what actually enables our people on the ship or the army floor to do so. What is? We'll be carrying on this conversation for the next 3 weeks. But what's your thing that you want to get about?
Thanks, Nick. And what a brilliant question. It's almost as though somebody planted that. So if you asked me that a year ago, I would have been thinking big and talking about fairly large initiatives. But I think I've come more and more to realize that I've only been in a job for a year and a half, so still learning every day, obviously, and that's probably not going to stop. But one thing I would really like to see, I'd like to see every sailor to be able to take their phone out of their pocket and see what jobs are available today. And if they like it, they can click on it. And somebody will pick that up and say, hey, do you want to come work or not? Or when's the next course? Or when do I need to get my fitness test done? Or when do I need to get my teeth checked? Checking that technology and using it to that effect, I think would be wonderful. If I could see that tomorrow, I think I'd be happy. That would be something that would just a game changer in my opinion.
Enable our people.
Enable our people to do what they want to do. Yeah. For those of you, I don't know, who are comfortable with the bureaucracy that's around us. I mean, it's amazing. To tell a little story, I remember as a sub-lieutenant putting in my application probably in November that said when I thought I'd be available in May. And so it was like, well, I'm a student. Okay, fine. Yeah, okay, good. And then forgetting about it. And so a message went off, and somebody had on somebody's desk list that said, okay, so Lieutenant Montgomery, available this day. And you want to do what? Forget it. Okay, next. And I was never part of that conversation. And around, let's say, the second week of May, I was sort of sitting at home going, am I going to get a job? Am I going to get training for this summer? I have no idea, because I'd finished my training. And I remember it being a Tuesday. I got a phone call from the chief clerk at the ship's office, said, where were you yesterday? I said, are you kidding? Okay, just joking aside, we've got a job for you. It just came through. Thanks very much. And I tell that as a personal story to say, 30-ish, 35-ish years ago, we haven't moved very much from that system. I still hear from sailors who put in their names and put in their dates and don't hear boo, right? Like it goes off into a void. It doesn't. It goes into, people who are working really hard in what we call our personnel coordination center, but it's hard to close that gap and they don't see it. And in a day where all we see is immediate information interchange, why aren't we doing that? So if Petty Officer Daru could go, and I just use your name because I know who you are, can say, oh, my job is ending in 18 months. What can I do next? Just browse. Hey, I'm interested in that. I'm going to put my name down for that. Then a couple of weeks later, you get a call from your crew manager that says, I see you're interested in that. Let's have a discussion. Does that make sense for you? I got these other ideas going on. Wouldn't you feel as though the institution was listening and they wanted to make you advance and give you something that would be a challenge? I would say yes. I mean, I think we do what we can right now, but I would think like that connection with technology would change the paradigm, more than just a nudge. Yeah. Thank you for the question.
It's all part of the service.
Boom, boom. Awesome. Hi, Jeff.
Sir, Captain Jeff, that's great vision, and you're halfway through your term. Where do you think you are then, from a tracking perspective, seeing that as reality?
So I ask this question regularly. I honestly don't know. I was hoping we would have I've seen prototypes. I've seen test drives. Carlton is doing some work with eABREVs. I'm hoping this spring that we'll have a first app that's not going to do what I said, but it'll be a step along that path.
So you get your minimum viable product, hopefully, by.
That's a good way to put it. Yes.
So we're all working on that. Naval Reserve is doing it.
Yeah.
Because what we need is access. So with access to the systems of record, it's getting easier. Getting away from
Industry, lots of industries.
my daughter has no access to the CDB, the systems of record.
Right. It stuns me that 18,000 students at Camosun College can go online and see what courses are available in the summer, but 4,000 reservists can't do that. And why not? Why can't you see what the course schedule looks like? Well, you have to go to a website. You have to click here. Oh, that file hasn't been updated yet. Just a moment. Call the petty officer who's in charge of that, and we'll get it sent to you. Okay. The information's there, but it's hard to get at. I don't mean to disparage it. There are people working really hard and doing amazing things, but it's on the backs of the people. And I think if we can leverage technology, we can do more, and we do more better. So, have I put everybody to sleep? It's good. That looks like it. And I really do wish to express my appreciation to the RAUSI. Thank you for the invitation and the time to be here. And hopefully have not been, hopefully done a couple of things. One, give you some information to think about, help you ask questions to the Tecumseh members who are here and could probably answer things better than I can. Maybe a little bit of an entertainment value. I understand, I get that, but mostly about building community. So I'm really thankful for seeing some faces I've seen before, and hope to see you again in the future. It's always a pleasure to visit Calgary, and thank you for making it not -20 outside. That's really awesome. Although I'm going up there. Okay, thank you.
Sure, just on behalf of Tecumseh and Royal United Alberta Services Institute, I would like to thank you for coming here today. So thanks very much for
Thank you.
this lovely presentation. It was very informative and entertaining as well. So it's lovely to have you. And I think the Commodore will stick around for a few more minutes. So if there are any other questions or comments that people have, you may continue to linger about, and the bar is still open for another moment.
And I neglected, there's one piece I wanted to play this out. How do we do this? Okay, so this is the Centennial March created by one of our reservists in Donnacona, and performed by the National Band of the Naval Reserve. So thank you very much, Alex, for making that available. That's great. Yeah, so I hope you saw some of your history on the screen very briefly. Okay, thank you, everybody.